I didn't think much of it at first. It was just another Thursday morning in Brook Hollow Ridge, quiet, suburban, tidy to the point of sterility. The mailboxes were all matching the lawns, suspiciously green year-round, and the HOA newsletters slid into our mail slots like sermons from a pulpit no one elected. I'd lived here going on 9 years now, tucked on the far edge of the subdivision where the pavement began to blend with gravel and fields. My acre lot was grandfathered in before the HOA's expansion, which meant I could still grow tomatoes and run a chicken coop without signing over my soul. And yes, I had a tractor, a 2013 Kubota L3901, with a front loader rusted in places, but still dependable as a sunrise. I used it to tend the rows of sweet corn and beans behind the house hall compost and tow crates from the apiary down the slope. It wasn't ornamental. It was essential. And until recently, no one had a problem with it, or maybe no one cared enough to bother a man who mostly kept to himself. But that changed last week, when a letter stamped with the HOA seal arrived folded on my porch like a threat in an envelope. I didn't need to read the entire thing to know where it was going. Still, I did twice just to let the absurdity settle in. The presence of a large agricultural vehicle, orange, in color parked in open view, constitutes a violation of the Brook Hollow Ridge Aesthetic Ordinance 8.3b, subsection 6. They called my tractor an agricultural eyesore, and just like that, everything I'd done for this neighborhood, the free eggs left in coolers by the mailboxes, the emergency honey for winter colds, the tomatoes I grew just so the Johnson twins could win their middle school garden award, all of it evaporated into a single HOA clause about how something looked. I should have expected it. The HOA had been growing more aggressive lately. Ever since Madison Lyle became president, the whole board had turned militant. Her husband was some high-ranking executive in supply chain management, and she liked to toss that credential around like it made her the neighborhood's queen of logistics. She once tried to have a grandfather clock removed from someone's porch for auditory pollution. Still, I filed a response, polite, factual. I noted that my property was not under their architectural jurisdiction and that the tractor was not visible from the main street unless someone walked up the side gravel path and stood on their toes. I reminded them gently that I was one of only 2 active agricultural plots in the development, and that my produce directly supported over a dozen households during the pandemic. I thought that would suffice. It didn't. 3 days later, a different letter arrived. This one came via courier with language that shifted from request to mandate. I was told to remove the tractor by the following Monday or face penalties. I didn't move it. I couldn't. Not out of pride, but practicality. The compost delivery was coming Friday, and I had no other way to transport the bins across the property. So I parked it beside the shed out of sight from the main road and went about my chores. Monday morning, I made coffee as usual, opened the chicken coop, and walked around to check on the trellised cucumbers. That's when I heard the sound a diesel engine low and grinding paired with the metallic whine of chains. I stepped around the corner and froze. A private towing company was in my yard. 2 men were securing chains to my tractor. One of them had his foot propped casually on my front loader like he owned the thing. Another was snapping photos on a phone, probably to show the board they'd completed their assignment. My breath caught and I walked down fast boots slapping hard against gravel. "Hey," I shouted, "get the hell off that machine!" The man with the phone turned to me like I was an inconvenience. Per the order of Brook Hollow Ridge HOA, we're removing unauthorized property from public view. "This is private land," I said, "and that's my tractor. You step off it, now." "Sir," he said with the exaggerated calm of someone who expected confrontation, "you can take it up with the board. We're just doing our job." I saw red. I didn't yell again. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started filming. Not in anger, but evidence. I narrated everything. Their plates, their faces, the coordinates, my lot line. I didn't get physical, though God knows I wanted to rip the keys out of their ignition. They loaded the tractor anyway. The chain clanged once, and just like that, my connection to the land was hauled off on the back of a flatbed. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, some from porches, watching it happen like a matinee they didn't pay to attend. No one said a word. Well, except one. Across the street, Madison Lyle stood on the curb in yoga pants and a visor, sipping from a stainless tumbler. She gave me a perfunctory wave and a smile so cold it could have chilled soil. I didn't wave back. The silence that filled me wasn't rage, not yet. It was something older. deeper, like the slow burning of coals under ash. I'd served overseas as a field engineer. I knew what it meant to watch something be dismantled, piece by piece, not because it was useless, but because someone in charge didn't like how it looked. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about a tractor. It was about control, and I wasn't about to give them another inch. I didn't sleep that night. The wind howled outside my window, rustling the rows of corn like ghostly fingers brushing through my work. The land always had a way of speaking to me, whispering in creaks and groans. But that night it felt restless, as if it too had been violated. The tractor was more than a machine. It was the extension of everything I built since leaving the city. After 22 years in environmental engineering, most of them spent knee-deep in bureaucratic policy and broken urban planning. I'd come out here to live a simpler truth, to work with my hands to grow real food, to be left alone. That was the deal I'd made with this patch of earth. And now the HOA had broken it. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up, boots dusty, jaw set, envelope of documentation in hand. Their office sat neatly beside the community clubhouse, a beige box of faux colonial pretense with patriotic bunting still half hanging from the last 4th of July barbecue. Inside it smelled like printer toner and citrus-scented wipes. A receptionist with big glasses looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to Madison," I said. "It's urgent." "She's in a meeting," the woman said with a hint of rehearsed indifference. "I can schedule you for Thursday." I didn't let her finish. "It's about the illegal removal of my property." That got her attention. A pause. She picked up the phone, murmured something into the receiver, then gestured toward the back hallway. "You can wait outside her door." I stood in that hallway for 20 minutes, listening to the muffled sound of voices. Madison's among them, sharp and clipped, like someone pruning roses with too much force. When the door finally opened, she stepped out wearing a navy blue blazer and a smile full of stainless steel charm. "Mr. Holden," she said, pretending she hadn't just destroyed part of my livelihood. "So glad you came by." "Don't insult me." She blinked. The hallway grew a degree colder. "I have every right," I said, holding up the papers to file a formal complaint with the county over what happened yesterday. That tractor wasn't on common ground. It was on my land. You had no legal authority to enter and remove it. She took the folder with a practiced hand, but didn't even glance at it. "We gave you multiple warnings." "You gave me threats," I said, disguised in HOA stationery. I responded, "You ignored that." She looked around the hallway as if checking for an audience. Then she lowered her voice and leaned in. "You're not the only one who lives here, Mr. Holden. This is a planned community. Standards exist for a reason." "Do those reasons include violating property rights?" I asked. She smiled again, not kindly this time. "The board has authority, under our covenants, to ensure uniformity. If we allow one person to treat their property like farmland, it is farmland," I snapped. "That's what you never understood." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so it burned only for her. "Do you know how many of your residents buy from me? How many use my eggs, my tomatoes, my preserves? Do you understand what happens when that stops?" Madison's jaw tightened. Her gaze didn't waver. "I don't negotiate with threats," she said. I stepped back. "Good," I said, because that wasn't one. I turned on my heel and left her standing there, still holding the folder she hadn't opened. Back home, I stood for a long time in the empty patch beside my shed where the tractor used to sit. It was like a phantom limb. My hands kept twitching for levers and steering columns that weren't there. My chores piled up. I couldn't haul mulch, I couldn't manage the beehive frames or adjust the irrigation trench. I could do some by hand, but at my age, and with the acreage I had, it was a losing game. Worse, the neighbors started showing up. That evening, 4 different households knocked on my door asking if I had tomatoes, squash, or eggs. I didn't turn them away. Not yet. I handed out what I could spare, but I didn't smile. I was measuring, watching, seeing how long it would take for them to realize what had been taken from them too. On Saturday morning, I drove to the impound lot where they'd taken the tractor. It was an industrial sprawl outside town, all razor wire and faded signs. When I asked for my equipment, the man behind the glass tapped at his computer, then frowned. "It's under hold." "What kind of hold?" He shrugged. "Says here it's tagged under dispute of ownership." "That's HOA language. You'll need a release letter from them." I stood there for a beat, gripping the counter so tightly the edge cut into my palm. "They stole it," I said flatly. The man didn't argue. I drove home in silence, passing rows of strip malls. empty shelves in the convenience store, and a backed-up gas line 2 blocks long. Something was brewing. A freight worker strike had been announced that week, and I knew from experience how fragile the food chain really was. One broken link, one missing delivery, and the suburbs would unravel like twine in the rain. I'd spent a career designing emergency response grids for natural disasters. I'd written federal protocols. I knew what came next. And so I waited. I worked by hand where I could, planting faster-growing greens in buckets, prepping the root cellar, rationing the chicken feed. Meanwhile, the HOA posted a smug little announcement on their community forum about enforcing neighborhood standards. My name wasn't mentioned, but my tractor was unsightly machinery unbecoming of a modern neighborhood. I didn't reply. I printed it out and tacked it to the inside of my barn, right above the peg where my work gloves used to hang. It would stay there until they understood what they'd done, not just to me, but to the system that had kept them fed without them ever realizing it. They had made this about appearances. They were about to learn what happens when you mistake polish for substance. Before all this, before the towing and the HOA threats, I used to believe in something simple. That if you gave more than you took, people would remember. They'd notice. They'd show up for you when the time came. Turns out I was wrong. People don't remember the hands that feed them. They remember the hands that interfere with their comfort. That's why Madison had an army of passive followers, because she gave them peace of mind, or at least the illusion of it, as long as everything looked pretty from the curb. She gave them order, and in return, they gave her silence. But I didn't start farming to be seen. I did it because I believe in the earth, in resilience, in not being another cog in the machine of boxed spinach and chemically treated apples. I started with tomatoes heirloom knobby and inconsistent, then hens, then bees, then barrels of collected rainwater behind the shed. Over time, my acre lot became more than a home. It became a system one I curated with a chip on my shoulder and the same care I used to design flood mitigation plans overseas. People noticed at first. It began with casual compliments. "Your sunflowers are amazing, Holden. How do you keep the aphids away, those eggs' richest yolks I've ever tasted?" Then came requests. Marla Anders from this ex street wanted to try making fresh pasta and asked for basil and eggs. I gave her enough for 3 batches. George from across the pond asked if I sold squash. His doctor put him on a low-sodium diet. I left him a bushel at his door the next morning. I never charged for it, not once. It wasn't about profit. I wasn't running a roadside market. I just believed in neighbors feeding neighbors. We live too close to each other to pretend we're strangers. When the pandemic hit and stores emptied out, the neighborhood really felt the weight of its dependencies. That's when my system got tested and proved itself. While people lined up outside Safeway for limp lettuce, my neighbors had collard greens, beans jars of pickled carrots, and clover honey. From me. I didn't hoard. I rationed with logic. I made survival kits. I was thanked with banana bread, handwritten cards, and tears. That was 2 years ago. Apparently their memory didn't make it to year 3. Now the same people who once cried with gratitude were snapping photos of my unapproved structures. Someone even filed a complaint about my compost pile attracting birds. They forgot, or maybe they chose to. I was never flashy. I didn't go to HOA socials or dress in khaki like the rest of them. I wore work boots and jeans, and my hands were cracked from the soil. I wasn't part of their wine club. I was the one who supplied their strawberries. But memory's a slippery thing when it's inconvenient. A week after the tractor was taken, I walked into town for feed. The co-op had reduced stock. Chicken meal was limited to 1 bag per household. The cashier gave me a look like I'd been the one to start the shortages. I paid and left. Back home, I checked on my greenhouse. It was still intact, warm, lush, and quietly humming with life. The peppers were coming in early. The hydroponic lettuce was nearly ready. I sat inside for a moment listening to the drip of water through PVC pipes I'd built by hand. In here, things made sense. Growth was earned. Results were real. There were no politics, no meetings, no votes. Just light, water, time. Later that afternoon, I saw a young couple parked by the edge of my driveway. They were new, moved in 6 months ago. The woman held a small bag and looked unsure whether to approach. I stepped out onto the porch. She waved timidly. "Hi, Mr. Holden, right?" I nodded. We heard about the tractor," she said. "We're really sorry." I raised an eyebrow. We used to buy our vegetables from you. And the honey. It helped a lot." She hesitated. I was wondering if you still had any. Even just a dozen eggs. I looked down at her bag. It was light, barely the size of a purse. She didn't bring money. She brought hope. I walked over slowly, hands tucked into the pockets of my flannel shirt. I have a few left, I said. But I don't sell anymore. Not since the HOA decided I wasn't neighborly enough. She flushed. We don't support what they did, honestly. That's good, I said, nodding toward her husband, who remained seated. But I don't recall seeing either of you at the last public hearing when they voted on new enforcement powers. Her smile faltered. I let the silence stretch. After a few seconds, I sighed and relented. Wait here. I returned with 6 eggs and a sprig of rosemary. Not enough to live on, just enough to remember. She took it with both hands, thanked me too many times, and left. That night, 3 more people came. The next day, it was 5. They'd say it wasn't their fault, that they didn't know, that they were just following rules or trying not to get involved. And maybe that was true. But I'd been in war zones. I'd seen what happened when good people stayed quiet until things hit their doorstep. They weren't the enemy, but they weren't allies either, not yet. I kept giving, but less. No more free deliveries. No porch coolers, no backyard pickup bins. If they wanted food, they had to look me in the eye and ask for it. Then something shifted. Midweek, I received a call from Liz Dwyer, the head of the local school garden program. She was frantic. Their supplier had pulled out. She asked if I had any compost, seedlings, anything at all. I told her I had plenty, but no vehicle to transport them. I thought you had a... She stopped mid-sentence. I used to, I said. She apologized. And then in a whisper that didn't quite mask her rage, she told me what I already suspected. Madison's husband had contracts with one of the HOA's preferred vendors. They'd used my violation as a reason to push new aesthetics compliance so his company could sell approved landscaping services. It wasn't about the tractor. It was about power. And now, because of it, 10 elementary school kids wouldn't get to plant their spring gardens. That night, I walked the perimeter of my property with a flashlight checking for broken fences. Coyotes had been active, and without the tractor to haul the heavy fencing rolls, I had to brace it all manually. My shoulders ached, my back burned, but I kept going. This land was all I had left. Outside, something was brewing. A freight worker strike had been announced that week, and I knew from experience how fragile the food chain really was. One broken link, one missing delivery, and the suburbs would unravel like twine in the rain. It began with wind. Not the kind that sweeps your hat off or rattles the windows a bit, but the kind that rolls through trees like a low growl, snapping branches before you know they're bending. The sky turned pewter gray late on a Friday afternoon, and by sundown it was as dark as a closed coffin. The local weather app called it a rare atmospheric river event, but out here we just called it a bad omen. The first storm hit hard. Sheets of rain slammed into the rooftops. My water barrels filled to the brim in hours, and the drainage ditch behind my greenhouse threatened to overflow. I stayed up most of that night in boots and a rain jacket, clearing leaves, redirecting runoff, praying the hillside wouldn't slide. I wasn't alone. Flashlights bobbed in the distance across neighboring yards. Even the HOA's precious community gardens, those shallow planters with succulents and stone mulch, were drowning. The next day brought silence. Then came the second wave. Trees fell across County Road 9, cutting off the main access to the subdivision. A mudslide closed the back highway. Power lines went down. Internet was spotty. UPS trucks stopped arriving. And for the first time in years, the weekly Brook Hollow Ridge newsletter went undelivered. I walked the perimeter the next morning and saw the beginnings of what I'd feared for months. Collapse doesn't announce itself with a bang. It arrives in details. The grocery store marquee had one working letter. A sign on the front door read, "Limit 2 milk products per family." I stopped by for some salt. The shelves were half stocked and strange corn syrup next to dog food coffee filters beside mouthwash. A young clerk with shaky hands told me in a hushed voice, "The trucks haven't come since Tuesday. We don't know when they will." By Sunday, the HOA called for a community preparedness meeting. It was the first time in years I'd seen the board invite open attendance without charging $10 for refreshments. I didn't plan to go, but something told me I needed to hear it. The meeting took place inside the clubhouse. The same clubhouse I'd helped build years ago, laying reclaimed wood for the benches and donating lighting for the tool shed out back. Funny how places forget you. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. There were too many bodies and not enough chairs. People whispered in clusters. Some held reusable shopping bags, I suppose out of habit. Others clutched printed lists or flyers. There were no refreshments, just stale air and the scent of damp wool. Madison stood at the front in her usual getup. She opened the meeting with a forced smile. We want to assure everyone that the HOA is coordinating with local vendors to ensure our supply chain remains stable during this temporary disruption. Someone in the back coughed loudly, a sarcastic bark that drew eyes. We encourage residents to practice moderation, she continued, and refrain from panic buying or hoarding. Our partner grocers have assured us that restocking will begin as soon as transport routes are cleared. Someone else muttered, "That's not what Carl at the co-op said." Madison pressed on. In the meantime, we've created a list of approved vendors and services to help with storm cleanup and food delivery. At that, I raised my hand. Her eyes locked on mine like daggers. "Mr. Holden," she said too sweetly, "we weren't doing QOA yet." I didn't lower my hand. "I'm not asking a question," I said. A pause. People shifted. I stepped forward, voice steady. "I'd like to offer a factual update. The county's agricultural extension issued a bulletin this morning. Supply interruption is expected to last at least 2 more weeks, possibly longer, if the strike expands." The room went quiet. I continued. "Local farms have already reported losses. Rail lines are backed up from here to Stockton. And unless you've got a backyard full of chickens and a working irrigation system, you're not going to be eating many fresh greens before next month." Someone gasped. A woman near the front turned pale. Madison smiled thinly. "Thank you, Mr. Holden, but we don't want to cause alarm." "This isn't alarm," I said. "This is logistics." I looked around. "You all know me. Some of you bought strawberries for me. Others used my honey for your kids' coughs. Some of you still eat eggs I raised. I've spent the last 9 years building a food system that works without trucks or vendors." A few heads nodded. "I'm telling you now, what you lost when they towed that tractor wasn't just my ability to haul compost. You lost your safety net." Madison interrupted. "That tractor was in violation of community codes. It was the only machine left in this subdivision capable of loading and transporting bulk food. It was also legal. You just didn't like how it looked." Gasps again, this time longer. Someone behind me whispered, "Is that true?" I didn't wait for Madison's reply. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to say this: if things continue the way they're going, you will need help. And not the kind that comes in cardboard boxes from Costco." Madison tried to salvage control. "We appreciate your concern, but the board already has plans in place." "What plans?" I asked. She froze. "What backup system do you have when deliveries stop, when seniors can't get their medication, when babies can't get formula?" Silence. My voice lowered. "You burned your bridges with the one person who actually grows food here. And now you're hoping no one notices until it's too late." I stepped back. The room stayed quiet. No one clapped. No one cheered. But no one interrupted me again either. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me in the parking lot. One woman, Carol, who ran the kids' art camp, clutched my arm. "Do you really have food stored?" "I have enough," I said, "but it's not endless." A man I didn't know well, Jeff, I think, offered to help. "If you need anything moved, I've got an old flatbed. She's rusty, but she runs." I thanked him. Another couple asked if they could help tend the garden. By nightfall, 10 different people had come to offer help, bartering skills or time. But I knew it was just the beginning. The real shift would come when the supermarket ran out of eggs, or when someone's kid asked for strawberries and there were none. That night, the rain started again. Harder this time. I checked the beehives and secured the greenhouse doors. My flashlight caught a flash of movement. In the dark, just raccoons probably. But the next day, 3 days after the meeting, that's how long it took before the first real cracks showed in Brook Hollow Ridge's pristine veneer. By Wednesday morning, the neighborhood Facebook group, once filled with yard sale flyers and dog-sitting posts, had turned into a desperate scroll of requests and complaints. Photos of barren shelves at Trader Joe's. "Does anyone have baby formula? Can I borrow rice?" Our Instacart order was canceled again. Then came the more shameful ones. "Hi neighbors, sorry to ask, but does anyone have extra dog food? Please delete if not allowed. Looking for eggs, will pay cash." The very people who once voted to keep unsightly agricultural equipment out of view were now bartering detergent for canned beans. And the HOA, oh, they tried. Madison released a carefully worded memo titled Proactive Community Food Support, filled with empty optimism and vague promises about partner grocers and emergency vendors. She even added a bullet point suggesting residents reduce waste by freezing leftovers. It was almost comical. What she didn't mention, what she couldn't mention, was that their pantry program had failed before it even began. Their preferred vendor had run dry on inventory. Their approved delivery system was an app that no longer serviced our zip code. And their plan to set up a centralized food depot in the clubhouse was shut down the moment the power flickered and the backup generator failed because apparently someone had forgotten to replace the battery last season. I found out the truth not from them, but from Darren Chen, a father of 3, HOA volunteer, and the man they'd put in charge of the food distribution committee. He showed up at my door Thursday evening, looking like a man who'd aged a year in 4 days. Holden, he said, barely waiting for me to open the screen door. I need your help. I looked him up and down. You were at the meeting. He nodded sheepish. I was the guy sitting behind the woman with the red hat. That narrows it down. He didn't laugh. He stepped forward. Madison wants to create a local food stockpile. I told her we can't do that without you. I said nothing. She thinks if we act fast enough, we can centralize what's left, take donations from whoever's still selling. But there's nothing left to buy, I said. He nodded. And the only place with any meaningful food supply, I added, is the one place she spent the last 2 weeks trying to discredit and dismantle. He nodded again, slower this time. I let the silence hang between us for a long moment. Then I opened the screen door wider. Come in. You look like hell. He exhaled. Inside, I poured him a glass of warm cider. He drank it too fast, like he hadn't tasted anything homemade in weeks. Then I walked him through what remained of my food stores. Half a cellar full of canned goods, bins of potatoes, onions, and winter squash, dozens of eggs, 20 gallons of clean water, dried herbs, jars of honey and jam. But more than that, I had systems. I had chickens still laying, bees still pollinating, a small hydroponic array in the greenhouse, raised beds of spinach, lettuce, arugula. You built a whole ecosystem, he said. I nodded. You could feed 20 families. Not forever, I replied, but for now, maybe. He looked at me, then hesitated. She'll never admit she was wrong, he said. But people are scared. Kids are going hungry. There's no milk. We've got 36 seniors on fixed incomes who can't even leave their houses right now. I crossed my arms. So what do you want? He didn't answer right away. Then softly, I want to know what it'll take for you to help. I studied him. Darren wasn't the enemy. He was a father in a neighborhood that was failing him. I walked over to the cabinet and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was every HOA violation letter they'd ever sent me, 26 in total. I dropped it on the table. I want a public apology, I said. From Madison. His mouth opened slightly. I want her to admit the HOA overstepped. On paper. No vague language. I want her to say we were wrong to penalize Mr. Holden for supporting our community. He didn't speak. And I added, I want them to repeal the Aesthetic Ordinance Section 8.3 Bowl subsection 6 permanently. He looked overwhelmed. And I said, walking to the door, I want control over the food distribution system. No interference, no board votes. I decide what goes where to whom and when. Darren blinked. And if she says no, he asked. I met his eyes. Then I locked the gate. He left without another word. That night, I found a folded note stuck into my front door frame. No envelope. Just paper handwritten in tight, neat script. We didn't know how much you mattered until we needed you. I'm sorry I stayed quiet when they took your tractor. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. If there's anything I can do, I'll be on your side this time. MG. I didn't know who MG was, but the letter stayed with me. Outside, the wind had become its own admission, and Madison could feel it too, because that Sunday morning she showed up at my front porch. Alone, no clipboard, no blazer, just a woman with a forced smile and trembling fingers. I have the letter, she said, if you still want it. I didn't answer. She handed me a white envelope, her eyes not meeting mine. Then she turned and walked away. I didn't open it until after she'd disappeared down the road. Inside, printed on official HOA letterhead, it read, "To whom it may concern, the Brook Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association formally acknowledges that recent enforcement decisions, including the removal of Mr. Holden's agricultural equipment, were made without full consideration of his contributions to the community and the food security he provided. These decisions were in error. We deeply regret the hardship this caused and recognize the importance of supporting local resilience. Effective immediately, the Aesthetic Ordinance Section 8.3b, subsection 6, has been rescinded. We offer our sincere apology to Mr. Holden." Signed, Madison Lyle. President Brook Hollow Ridge HOA. I read it twice. Then I folded it, set it on the counter, and unlocked the farm gate. It took exactly 37 hours before I locked it again. The farm gate. I hadn't intended to. After Madison's letter, that thin, shaky sheet of paper that felt less like an apology and more like a reluctant surrender, I thought maybe, just maybe, we were on the path to something better. Something human. But it only took a day and a half before the misuse started. The very moment word got out that the gate was open, the trickle became a flood. The first morning was fine. 5 neighbors showed up, the ones who had come to me humbly during the storm. Carol brought her daughter, who carried an empty basket. They stayed and helped collect eggs. Jeff helped me lift the broken trellis in the back row of peas. He didn't ask for anything in return. That felt good. That felt like community. But by that evening, 3 cars had parked illegally along the gravel shoulder just outside my lot, their drivers roaming around as if they were at a weekend farmer's market. They poked into the greenhouse without asking. One even tried to lift the lid off my compost barrel to take a look at how you do it. I told him gently but firmly that it wasn't a tour. That night, a neighbor I barely knew, Kendra, from the corner lot with the high hedges and no eye contact, sent me a 3-paragraph email requesting 10 cartons of eggs, weekly, preferably on Fridays, in exchange for HOA volunteer hours. The next day, things escalated. A woman in athletic wear I'd never seen before showed up with a red wagon and began picking squash directly from my vines. No knock, no question. When I approached her, she acted startled, as if I were the one trespassing. I thought this was part of the new co-op, she said defensively. Madison said you were distributing. Distribution means I decide what leaves, and when I said keeping my voice steady. Not that you show up and take what you want. She shrugged and muttered something about overreacting. I watched her walk off with a dozen zucchinis, and that's when I knew. They didn't understand. They never had. They saw a gate and thought access. They saw a rescinded policy and thought entitlement. They saw food and thought mine. They hadn't earned it. Not with their hands or time or humility, only desperation. That evening, I stood beside the open gate, the same one I'd unlocked less than 2 days before, and stared at the muddy tire tracks across my gravel. Then I slid the bolt shut, and this time I padlocked it. The next morning, the neighborhood Facebook page exploded. Why is Holden hoarding again? And he said he was going to help. Isn't the HOA in charge of distribution? I thought this was a community effort. Why does one man get to decide who eats? But not everyone joined the chorus. A quiet resistance had become its own admission. Carol posted it's his land, his food, and we owe him better than this. Jeff commented, y'all were silent when they towed his tractor. Now you want zucchini? Someone else, initials only MG, again wrote, the man built a food web from nothing. Maybe instead of shouting, we should ask what we can build with him. I didn't reply. I just watched and waited. That afternoon, Darren returned. He didn't knock, just waited respectfully on the other side of the locked gate until I noticed him. I walked over slowly. I figured this might happen, he said. Then maybe you understand why it had to. He looked past me toward the greenhouse, the orchard, the coop. His eyes carried something heavier this time. I do, he said. And I think some of the others are starting to as well. I didn't respond. I want to make this right, he added. Really? How? I asked. He pulled a sheet of paper from his jacket and passed it through the bars. It was a list. Dozens of names, addresses, and next to each one a set of initials under the header. Agreed to farm work, rotation. He smiled faintly. 17 families have offered to help. Manual labor. No compensation. Just a willingness to be involved. I read through it. Carol's name was there. Jeff's, MG's. Even a few I didn't expect, like Tom, the former HOA treasurer, and Denise, whose husband once petitioned to have my rain barrels removed. Darren cleared his throat. They want to build garden boxes, raised beds, even help deliver. You'd still be in charge, but it wouldn't just be you anymore. I let out a slow breath. Tell them I said if they want to show up, they can Saturday morning. But they come ready to sweat. No yoga pants, no lattes, real work clothes. He nodded. No one enters the greenhouse without gloves. No one touches the irrigation lines. And if anyone tries to harvest without permission, they're out. His eyes widened with something that felt close to respect. You'll keep the gate locked until then. I nodded. He turned to leave, but then stopped. Holden, he said. I looked up. I used to think you were just the stubborn old guy with too many chickens. Most days I said I still am. He grinned. But you're also the reason we haven't starved yet. Just thought you should hear that. And then he left. That night, I pulled out the worn manila folder, the one filled with all my old HOA violations, and tossed it into the fireplace. One by one, the letters curled into ash. I stared at the flames until the room turned silent. Outside, the wind had died down. The earth was still, but something new was moving. Not a storm, not panic. Something steadier, a turning. And come Saturday, we'd see just how far it would go. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cold that bites through denim. The sky hung low and colorless, the air damp with the memory of last week's storm. But I was up before dawn, tying back the greenhouse door, checking the compost aeration, and measuring moisture levels in the raised beds. Everything had to be ready. Because if they showed up and I still wasn't sure there would be no room for indecision. By 6:45, I'd nearly convinced myself that no one was coming. By 7:10, I was proven wrong. The first to appear was Carol, her daughter, trailing behind with work gloves already pulled tight over tiny hands. Then came Jeff carrying a battered toolbox in one hand and a thermos of black coffee in the other. He nodded at me like we'd known each other for decades. Then Darren, MG, a man named Tom from the HOA Finance Committee. Denise, the rain barrel opponent, showed up holding a tray of seedling starts, kale, and Swiss chard. Slowly, steadily, they trickled in until my front drive looked like a staging ground. 24 people in total. No HOA badges. No clipboards. No instructions passed down from some central committee. Just neighbors, all shapes and ages, dressed in flannel and denim and fleece-lined gloves. I unlocked the farm gate. No one spoke until they stepped through. Then they really looked at what I'd built. The rows of green clinging to life through frost. The chickens cooing from the coop, the compost piles steaming gently in the corner, the whisper of water moving through buried pipes. And for the first time, I didn't see pity or judgment in their faces. I saw awe. I didn't give a speech. I simply pointed. Beds over there need winter mulch turned. Coop needs fresh hay. Don't touch the hives. And if you're new to a shovel, say so before you hurt yourself. A few laughed, not out of mockery, but relief. Then they scattered, eager and awkward and ready. And just like that, something began. I stayed quiet most of that morning, moving from one work group to the next, correcting where needed, demonstrating, explaining. At one point, I caught Madison's former assistant, the one from the HOA office, down on her knees, carefully weeding a raised bed of carrots. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, and she nodded once, firmly, as if to say, I know. The work was real. The conversations, tentative at first, began to pick up. Carol asked if she could bring kitchen scraps for compost. Jeff offered his truck to haul mulch from the hardware store. Tom from finance asked quietly if there was any way we could build a tool-sharing system to cut down on duplicate purchases in the community. By midday, I'd seen more real cooperation than I had in 9 years of mandatory HOA potlucks and paper-wrapped newsletters. But the real moment, the moment I felt the tide turn, came just after noon. A small boy named Eli, maybe 6 or 7, came running up from the orchard holding 2 apples in his hands. His cheeks were flushed, his coat slightly too big. He waved one of the apples in the air and shouted, "Mom, these taste better than store ones." I froze, not because of the words, but because of what they meant. This child, this next generation, was tasting real food grown in his own neighborhood, not shrink-wrapped and trucked in from 3 states over. And he knew the difference. He felt the difference. His mother, a woman I hadn't met yet, looked over and smiled. He hasn't had anything fresh in a week. It's been cereal and crackers and peanut butter. She looked at me. Thank you. I don't know why, but that got me. Not the speeches, not the letters, not even the padlocked apology from Madison. It was that one honest sentence from a mother about feeding her child. I cleared my throat, nodded, turned back toward the compost so they wouldn't see the heat in my eyes. After the last wheelbarrow was emptied and the last rake hung back on its peg, we gathered under the pergola beside the greenhouse. No one asked for reward. No one asked for more. They just stood there, tired and quiet, like people who had done something worth being tired for. I looked at them, a ragtag mix of strangers and once silent neighbors, and said the only thing I felt. This isn't about charity, I said. It's about dignity. About growing what we need instead of waiting for someone to sell it to us. If you're here for that, then we keep going. Someone clapped, then another. And then it wasn't a speech anymore. It was a moment, one that no newsletter could orchestrate and no HOA vote could engineer. That evening, I walked the full length of my fence, flashlight in hand. At the far end, near the old irrigation ditch, I found something unexpected. A plastic cooler. Inside 3 cartons of eggs. A bundle of fresh rosemary. A note. From our backyard to yours. Just a thank you. We're trying to grow something too. Lot 42. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Outside, the wind stirred the pines. Inside, I exhaled long and full. Something was shifting. Not everyone. Not yet. But the wind was changing, and Madison could feel it too. By mid-December, the soil had hardened, and the air carried that quiet metallic edge that meant winter was coming fast. But something else was in the air too, a different kind of shift. Not just weather. Not just seasons. Momentum. Word had spread beyond Brook Hollow Ridge. It started with a local blogger, one of those neighborhood watch types, who usually reported on pothole repairs and stray dog sightings. She'd heard from a friend of a friend that our community farm was feeding over 30 families and had reduced grocery store dependency in our zip code by more than 40%. That was enough for a column. But what came next, no one saw coming. The post went viral. Then the newspaper called. Then the radio. And then one morning, a woman in a gray parka and wool hat appeared at the gate with a notepad and a microphone clipped to her collar. NPR, she said. Mind if I ask a few questions? I was wary. But something in her voice, calm, sincere, made me pause. She wasn't here to mock. She was here to understand. So I gave her a tour. I showed her the greenhouse, the raised beds, the barrel irrigation system, and the insulated chicken coop I'd built from reclaimed pallets. She asked the right questions, listened more than she spoke. And when she was done, she said one thing I hadn't heard in a long time. You planned all of this, didn't you? Not just the farm, the resilience. I didn't answer at first. But then I said I've been planning for it since 2008. She tilted her head. Because of the recession, I shook mine. Because of the fragility I saw when I was in Mosul. And just like that, the past stepped back into the room. She blinked. You served. Army Corps of Engineers. Logistics. 2 deployments. She looked around the farm like she was seeing it with new eyes. That explains the layout, she said. Your water capture system, your trenching pattern, the food rotation schedules. You built this like a forward operations base. I almost laughed. In a way, yeah, just with more basil. The interview aired a week later. It wasn't sensational, no dramatic voiceovers or orchestrated music. Just a soft-spoken journalist walking listeners through a quiet revolution built out of compost chicken wire and strategic humility. The piece was titled, The Man Who Fed His Neighborhood When the System Broke. And in the final moments, her voice said, he never raised his voice. He never filed a lawsuit. He never demanded obedience. He just kept growing, and eventually the people grew with him. The calls began the next morning. First from a nearby community, Miller's Run, asking if I'd come speak to their city council about starting a local food co-op. Then a message from the county agricultural board inviting me to join a new initiative focused on urban-suburban farming networks. Even the mayor's office called someone had forwarded the interview. He wanted to meet. But the message that shook me most came as a voicemail. From someone I hadn't heard from in 15 years. Hey, Holden. This is Serena. I heard you on the radio. I knew it was you the second you started talking about trench irrigation. You always were obsessed with water flow. Listen, I'm proud of you. The girls are proud too. I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I sat with that one for a while. Serena and I hadn't spoken since I sold our house in North Carolina after the divorce. We weren't bitter, just broken. I chose work fields over custody courts. She kept the kids close to city schools and stability. We'd both done our best, just in different directions. But that message opened something in me I thought had gone silent. It reminded me that resilience wasn't just about crops or co-ops. It was about people, reconnection, repair. That weekend, I hosted the first official meeting of what the neighborhood now called the Ridge Co-op. We printed agendas. We used chalkboards and clipboards and notebooks. No one wore name tags. No one wore suits. But every person there brought food stories, seeds, or time. Madison sat near the back, quiet but present. Her hands stayed folded in her lap the whole time. I didn't call on her. I didn't need to. Just her sitting there, absorbing rather than directing, was its own kind of apology. I stood at the front, still in my worn flannel, and told them the truth. You already know who I am. You've seen my farm. Some of you have eaten my eggs or planted tomatoes in my soil. I don't want power. I want participation. If I'm elected, I won't tell you what your grass height should be. I'll ask what we can build together. That got applause. Loud, real, not polite. Voting took less than an hour. Counting longer. We waited in small groups, sipping thermoses, and whispering about how strange it all felt, not scary, just new. Like waking up from a long sleep. Finally, the results were posted. Unanimous. The entire HOA board recalled. In their place, a new council, 5 people. 3 from the Ridge Co-op, 1 retired teacher and me. Someone uncorked a bottle of cider. Someone else passed out cookies. And for the first time since I'd moved here, the community hall actually felt like a community hall. Afterward, as we gathered outside beneath the brittle winter stars, someone asked me, "What's the first thing you'll do?" I looked out over the parking lot, at the bundled kids, the smiling volunteers, the quiet buzz of energy that had nothing to do with fear or fines. "I'll listen," I said. That night, I walked home alone, boots crunching snow-dusted gravel. No victory parade, no celebration, just the deep, steady warmth of something earned. Back at the farm, I checked the greenhouse temperature, steady humidity, balanced. Chickens were roosting quietly, feathers puffed content. I stepped into the barn and turned on the single hanging bulb. In the corner sat my tractor. It had been returned the week after Madison's apology, quietly, unceremoniously. No tow truck this time. Just a neighbor, the man who'd once helped tow it away, driving it back down my gravel drive, leaving it with the key tucked in the ignition and a note on the seat. Sorry we didn't understand. We do now. I ran my hand across the steering wheel. It was warm from use. Outside wind stirred the pines. Inside I exhaled long and full. Something had come. Not through shouting, not through sabotage. Through compost and cooperation. And the stubborn belief that things could grow again if you gave them enough light. Spring arrived not with a dramatic bloom, but slowly like a breath returning to a long-starved lung. The frost ebbed. Saplings pushed their way through thawed soil. Bees emerged in modest numbers from the hives I'd wintered with extra care. And on the mornings, I stepped out to stretch my back and squint into the sun. I could smell it, renewal. But the change wasn't just in the earth. It was in the people. Gone were the stiff waves across driveways or the polite, clipped conversations at mailbox clusters. In their place were wheelbarrows rumbling along sidewalks, children crouched in garden beds, and neighbors comparing compost ratios over coffee like some traded secret. Brook Hollow Ridge had become something it had never been before alive. We didn't abolish the HOA, we transformed it. The old model of top-down control of fines and fear and aesthetic tyranny was replaced with a new charter written by real people for real needs. No more rules about approved lawn edging or the width of front porch columns. Instead, we drafted a community participation agreement that centered around shared responsibility, contribution-based membership, and voluntary stewardship. Every resident had a vote. Every resident had a voice. And the first project under this new charter, we built a second greenhouse together. It stood at the southern end of the old community park, which had once been kept locked, except for sanctioned HOA events. Now it had become the beating heart of our co-op, renamed The Ridge Commons by unanimous decision. Kids helped paint the sign. Seniors contributed seed packets and decades of gardening knowledge. Even the previously silent, well-manicured residents from the cul-de-sac joined in, showing up with folding chairs and lemonade for volunteers. Madison came too, not to lead, not to control, to participate. She worked with a quiet determination, mostly in the background, always asking before touching. In one surprising moment, I saw her kneeling in the dirt beside Carol's daughter, helping tie soft garden string between poles. She looked up, caught me watching, and offered a nod that said what words never had. Thank you for not closing the door forever. We even held a community festival in May. Nothing extravagant, just tables with fresh produce, baked goods, and crafts. A donation bin for local food pantries, a few acoustic musicians from the high school. But to me, it felt like standing in a city I had helped rebuild, not from rubble, but from silence. A reporter from the county agriculture office stopped by. She was young, eager, asked a dozen questions. At one point, she looked around at the booths, the gardens, the rows of squash already curling upward from raised beds, and said, "How did you pull this off? You didn't just survive the supply chain collapse. You came out stronger." I thought about it. Then I told her the truth. I stopped trying to win, and I started growing. She looked puzzled. "But weren't you the one who led the recall vote, rewrote the charter?" I smiled. That came later. The first thing I did was plant tomatoes and trust people would come back for them. She scribbled that down in her notebook like it was poetry. Maybe it was. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I walked the length of my fence, The same path I'd paced 100 times with dread, anger, or resolve. This time I walked with peace. The gate was open. I hadn't locked it in months. I reached the barn and stepped inside. My tractor stood in the corner, polished and cared for by a rotation of teenage volunteers who'd adopted it like a community mascot. I rested my hand on the seat. It was warm from use. In the far stall, 3 high schoolers were organizing seed trays for an upcoming co-op workshop. They waved when they saw me, and I waved back. I didn't need to supervise. They knew what they were doing. Outside the barn, I heard the low buzz of the new irrigation system we'd installed last week. Gravity-fed from rain barrels piped underground, designed and built by a dozen hands instead of one. I leaned on the fence, watching the chickens peck through straw as the sky burned orange with evening. Somewhere behind me, music drifted from a house window. Laughter followed. This was what I had always wanted, not to be left alone, but to be part of something that didn't require surrendering who I was. I didn't become the hero of this place. I became its soil, rich enough to grow from, forgiving enough to heal in. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of warm cider and opened the letter I'd been saving for weeks. The return address said North Carolina. The handwriting was familiar. Dear Holden, we're thinking of coming to visit this summer. The girls want to see the greenhouse you won't stop sending photos of. I hope there's room for 2 teenagers and 1 sentimental ex-wife. Also, I'm proud of you. Not just for the farm. For building something that lasted longer than blame. Let me know what to pack. Oh. Serena. I folded it gently, held it against my chest, and closed my eyes. Everything I'd lost came back to me differently, gently, with time. Not in the form I expected, but in the form I needed. As dusk fell over the ridge, the porch light flicked on behind me. I didn't turn it off, because I knew someone else would be coming down the path soon. Maybe for eggs, maybe for stories, maybe just to help tuck the chickens in. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was ready to say, welcome.